Welcome back to the Deep Dive. This is where we dig into a subject, maybe one you think really get into the source material and pull out the details you need, all delivered, with maximum conversational energy.
Ready to dive in.
Yeah, today we're tackling something really essential, I think, for anyone who cares about the history of heavy music. We're zeroing in on just one piece of hardware, a little effects pedal, actually. Yellow, unassuming.
But it did more than just get popular in a genre.
Exactly. It fundamentally changed the DNA, like the genetic code of a whole subgenre of metal.
It's such a perfect topic for this kind of deep dive because the story here, it's a beautiful accident, really.
Right.
The gear that changes everything isn't always the most expensive, custom-built thing. Often it's that little box designed for one job.
And then totally repurposed.
Repurposed for pure sonic aggression.
Yeah. So our mission today is a proper deep dive into the legendary BOSS HM series, these distortion pedals. We're going to track their journey from, a kind of misunderstood analog circuit back in the early 80s.
Right up to its modern comeback, its resurrection.
Yeah. We're pulling together info on three key models: the original, the Icon, the HM2 heavy metal, then there's the HM3 hyper metal, sort of the transitional one.
And the new kid, relatively new kid on the block, the HM2W Wazacraft, the modern revered version.
And the theme running through all this, it's about how this raw, just unapologetic sonic aggression, how that became an immortal sound.
And critically, how technical limitations, maybe circuit flaws, maybe just designers kind of missing the mark on how people would actually use it. How those things can sometimes have the biggest and completely unintended cultural impact.
We're hunting for the real story behind that sound, that unmistakable chainsaw grime.
Let's do it.
Okay, let's start where the legend kicks off, section 1. The chainsaw legend, the BOSS HM2 heavy metal. Production ran from 1983 to 1991. But yeah, like you said, not quite where the designers thought it would end up. It's so easy now to look at the HM2W, the Wazacraft one, as this refined tribute. But to really get it, you have to go back to 83. And just appreciate how radically misunderstood that original pedal was when it first came out. What was BOSS even trying to build?
Yeah, good question. They were trying to build their first proper high-gain distortion pedal. That was the goal.
Okay.
And they were specifically aiming to replicate, their words were, the saturated roar of early 1980s British stacks.
Ah, okay. So think Marshall stacks.
Exactly. Think Marshall JCM 800s, pushed to the absolute limit. They weren't thinking about, some underground Swedish scene. They were aiming for arena rock, the sound of the new wave of British heavy metal.
Like big hair, big riffs.
That kind of thing. They wanted to bottle that huge wall of sound and stick it in one of their compact, tough little yellow stomp boxes.
So how did they try and cram that huge sound into that tiny box? What was the tech?
Okay, so technically, they went with a fully analog op-amp distortion circuit. This is really key.
Analog, right?
Yeah. The main parts used what's called a quad op-amp IC. That's an integrated circuit, usually something pretty robust, like an M52 18L chip. And this chip, it drives what engineers call symmetrical silicon diode clipping.
Okay, hang on. Let's unpack that a bit for people listening.
Yeah.
Symmetrical silicon diode clipping. What does that actually mean? And maybe more importantly, what does it sound like?
Okay, simplest terms, clipping is just what happens when you push the circuit too hard. You overload it, and the peaks of your guitar signal, the waveform, they get chopped off, clipped.
Okay.
Symmetrical means they get chopped off equally on the top and bottom, the positive and negative sides. And the silicon diodes, they basically set a lower bar for when that clipping starts. So the sound. The waveform gets really compressed very aggressively. It starts looking more like a square wave. And that's exactly what gives you that really dense, harmonically packed, aggressive buzzsaw texture.
Gotcha. So it's not like a smooth, warm overdrive.
No, not at all. It's engineered compression.
Yeah.
Designed for just maximum saturation, maximum grind.
So they built this really aggressive foundation, but we have to talk about the power thing. The power requirements for these old vintage units. It's kind of notorious in the guitar world, right?
Yeah.
Adds a whole layer of hassle if you want to use an original one today.
Oh, absolutely. Huge point. The vintage HM2, it needed either a standard 9-volt battery or, and this is the crucial bit, the older BOSS ACA adapter standard.
Right, not the PSA ones everyone uses now.
Exactly. The modern standard is the PSA adapter. The ACA worked differently. It was designed to take a higher voltage, usually 12 volts, and step it down inside the pedal to 9 volts. But the pedals themselves often didn't have the right internal bits, the resistor, to regulate that power perfectly.
Okay, so what happens if you take an original HM2, a vintage one, and plug it into a modern power supply? like the standard 9-volt output on most pedal boards today.
You're actually starving the circuit. You're undervolting it. And that messes with the biasing, the sort of operating voltage point of the whole circuit.
Yep.
Now, some players kind of liked the weird sagging compression that happened.
Right, the dying battery sound sometimes people chase.
Kind of, yeah. But more often, it just resulted in that classic HM2 high-pitched whine or hum, just this really annoying noise floor, which is a real pain if you're trying to use a vintage HM2 in a modern, quiet setup.
Yeah, I can imagine.
It's one of those things. Charming, maybe, but also deeply annoying, a quirk of early 80s analog design. So yeah, the HM2, despite its later fame, it only ran from 83 to 91 before BISS replaced it. Hashtag BB. The mechanics of the color mix?
Okay, so the technical base was aggressive. But the story really pivots, the genre-defining turn. It happens when you look at the controls. You've got your standard level, your distortion knob, but then you have those two crucial EQ controls. The ones BOSS brilliantly called color mix. L and H for low and high.
This is the heart of the chainsaw.
Right.
Yeah, this is where that technical limitation or maybe just an overly ambitious design choice becomes this revolutionary feature. What's wild here is that the EQ circuit was just exceptionally powerful, maybe too powerful for what they intended.
How so?
It wasn't really designed for subtle tweaks, just adding a bit of bass or treble. It was designed to color the sound aggressively. The actual EQ curve itself was super specific, a really deep cut in the mid-range.
Scooped mids.
Big time scoop, combined with heavily boosted lows and heavily boosted highs.
Give us an analogy, maybe, because picturing that EQ curve is kind of essential to understanding the whole HM2 sound.
Okay, imagine you're looking at the frequencies of your guitar tone like a graph. The HM2 EQ is like taking a huge ice cream scoop and just digging out the entire middle section. The frequencies where maybe the snare drum or the vocals usually sit.
Right, the body of the sound.
Yeah, and then you take the remaining low end and the remaining high end and you boost them so violently that they just completely dominate everything. And when you add the distortion on top of that, those super boosted frequencies get smashed into that clipping stage we talked about.
Okay.
And that generates all this extra harmonic noise. It starts sounding less like a guitar and more like, I don't know, industrial machinery just running totally overloaded.
Wow. And that famous setting, the all knobs, maxed setting level, distortion, color mix, L and H, all cranked right up. That became the key. Why was that the magic setting?
Because of how those EQ controls interacted.
Yeah.
Especially the color mix knobs. When you cranked both the L, the low color mix, and the H, the high color mix, right up to the maximum, you weren't just adding a little bit of bass and treble. No, you were applying this massive, almost exponential frequency boost right before the signal finally left the pedal. And this huge extreme shaping combined with that super aggressive symmetrical clipping, that's what generated that raw, saturated harmonic fuzz, that chainsaw grain.
The interaction was that strong.
Oh, incredibly strong.
Yeah.
The pedal basically loses any sense of subtlety at that point. It's like taking the safety governor off a big engine. It just goes wild.
So the designers, they probably just wanted users to dial in a bit of sparkle, maybe some low-end thump.
Exactly. Not max out the entire thing and unleash sonic warfare.
So what we're seeing is BOSS designed this pedal aiming for a stadium rock sound, focusing on, powerful lows, shimmering highs. But the underground, the metal scene, they took it and dragged it into the swamp instead. Hashtag C-take, tonal profile, and cultural significance.
That's precisely it. That maxed out sound, it's just aggressive. Grinding distortion, really defined by extreme compression, huge sustain, and that signature raw harmonic saturation. It's the unique growling buzzsaw tone.
But initially, it didn't really take off, did it? It was kind of misunderstood and underappreciated, as our sources say. The early uses were more like what BUS-S intended. Early heavy metal, hard rock, using moderate settings.
Yeah, and probably getting some pretty muddy, confusing sounds out of it, honestly.
Why didn't it become the big mainstream success BUS-S probably hoped for?
Well, ironically, its biggest technical strength, that powerful EQ, was also its biggest commercial weakness, at least initially.
How so?
That really strong coloration, that massive EQ shaping, it just made it almost impossible to use subtly. For your average rock guitarist, it had a really narrow sweet spot, maybe even non-existent for some styles.
It didn't blend well.
No, it dominated. It completely took over the sound. But this inherent technical flaw, if you want to call it that, it became its most revolutionary feature when it fell into the hands of the right musicians. Creative, extreme metal players.
It was hard to use subtly.
So they just stopped trying to be subtle with it. They cranked it.
Which brings us to that pivotal moment. The migration, sonically at least, to Sweden. Late 80s, early 90s. This is where the HM2 becomes legend.
Absolutely. We have to spend some time here. This is the iconic use case, Swedish death metal. While early death metal in places like the US or the UK often had these drier, maybe more treble-focused tones.
Right, like early Morbid Angel or Death.
Yeah, that kind of vibe. But the bands coming out of Stockholm in the late 80s, we're talking Entombed, Dismember, At the Gates is another huge one they grabbed onto the HM2. And they figured out that by running it with everything dimed,
All 4 knobs to 10.
level, distortion, color mix L, color mix H, all of it, they realized they could create this insane, continuous, just impenetrable wall of sound distortion.
It wasn't just loud distortion, it was terrifying. It genuinely sounds like metal gears grinding right in your ears. How did that specific EQ curve, that massive scoop and boost, actually enable the Swedish death metal sound?
It was like this accidental stroke of engineering genius for that specific genre, that huge mid-scoop we talked about. Yeah. It cleared out frequencies, right, where things like the bass guitar, the kick drum, even the snare usually have their fundamental tones. So the guitar signal, even though it was overwhelmingly loud and distorted, it didn't just turn into mush. It didn't clash horribly with the rhythm section.
It created space.
Precisely. The sound profile became almost two distinct things. This massive, grinding, low-end foundation, like a subterranean rumble, and then this piercing, aggressive, high-end buzzsaw cutting through everything. And that space in the middle allowed the bass and drums to stay distinct and punchy, which is a real hallmark of that classic Swedish death metal production. You can hear everything clearly, despite the sonic chaos.
Wow. So the thing that made it kind of bad for general rock, that huge mid-scoop, actually made it better for the whole band mix in that very specific extreme context.
Exactly right. This single sonic discovery basically birthed the Swedish death metal sound, the buzzsaw tone. It cemented the HM2's place, not just as some cool vintage pedal, but as a genuine icon that defined an entire much-loved subgenre.
Amazing.
And anecdotally, part of why it caught on there was probably practicality, too. While bands in the US or UK might have been chasing expensive custom amps, the HM2 was just available. It was tough. It was relatively cheap, especially secondhand in Scandinavia back then.
Makes sense.
Its use even kind of stretched beyond guitars sometimes. People found niche uses for it as just this crushing bass distortion for really gritty industrial tones using that super thick low end it puts out.
Okay, so let's sum up the original HM2, the pros. Definitely that unique, super aggressive EQ voice, that thick, full low end. And obviously, it's iconic status for extreme metal.
Yep.
The cons, though, that really narrow sweet spot for anything other than extreme metal, really hard to use subtly. And that whole annoying, noisy, vintage ACA power issue.
It was raw, unapologetic, and completely genre-defining, almost entirely by accident. Okay, so as we move out of the 80s and into the early 90s, the whole landscape for high-gain music starts shifting pretty significantly.
Right. Death metal was still a force, but other things were coming up.
Exactly. You had groove metal taking off, industrial metal was getting bigger, more polished alternative metal styles were emerging, and audiences and producers started wanting high-gain tones that had maybe a bit more clarity, more precision, easier to use in a studio mix.
So following the HM2's run, which ended in 91, and maybe by SS realizing the market needed something, I don't know, less absolutely chaotic. They bring out the HM3 Hyper Metal in 1993. And this pedal seems designed specifically to address those changing tastes. The goal, our sources say, was clear. Offer a more modern, scooped high-gain tone compared to the HM2's just raw, uncontrollable abrasion.
Yeah, if you connect it to the bigger picture, BISS was definitely trying to keep up, trying to meet those contemporary demands. The HM2 was amazing for one very specific, very extreme sound.
The chainsaw.
The chainsaw. But for your average high-gain player back then, especially folks influenced by the rise of thrash production, maybe early new metal sounds, the HM2 could just sound too muddy, too unruly.
Right.
The HM3 was meant to be the answer. The disciplined, studio-friendly version of high-gain. Tighter, maybe? #TagTagB. Technical differences and refinement.
Okay, so technically, the HM3, it was still an analog high-gain op-amp circuit, right? Similar bones to the HM there.
Bones, yeah. But it was already kind of competing internally with what became BISS's real high-gain monster for that era, which had actually launched a couple of years earlier, the MT2 Metal Zone.
Ah, the Metal Zone. Everyone knows that one.
Exactly. And our sources note the HM3 was actually much simpler than the Metal Zone. Critically, it didn't have the MT2's really complex, deep, mid-frequency parametric EQ control.
So they simplified it.
They chose simplification, specifically trying to to tame the HM2's wild nature. They streamlined the EQ dramatically. It still had level and distortion knobs, of course, but that really aggressive color mix name, the one that accidentally became legendary, gone. Replaced with just low and high knobs, like on tons of other pedals.
So a much more standard approach.
Totally suggests a deliberate move towards something more standard, more manageable, making it way easier for a regular player to just dial in sounds that work without accidentally summoning demons.
Okay, wait a second, though. If the HM3 was technically maybe more refined, definitely easier to power than the original HM2, why did the MT2, the metal zone, which is notoriously kind of fiddly with that parametric mid-control, why did that become the defining high-gain pedal of the 90s and not the HM3?
That's kind of the core tension of this whole transitional phase, isn't it?
No.
The MT2 ended up dominating precisely because it had that complexity, that parametric control.
Oh.
Even though it was, difficult to dial in sometimes, it gave players really precise control over those crucial mid-frequencies. You could scoop them out perfectly for that classic 90s rhythm crunch, or you could boost specific mids to make your solos cut through.
And the HM3 couldn't do that.
The HM3, by simplifying things, it lost that flexibility. It became competent, reliable, but ultimately maybe a bit less exciting than the feature-packed, if slightly intimidating, MT2.
Gotcha. But one big thing the HM3 definitely did right, showing its commitment to being modern and user-friendly, was the power situation.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, essential change. It completely switched from that old, confusing ACA adapter requirement
Finally.
to the modern standard PSA adapter. That instantly eliminated all the noise issues, the powering headaches of the vintage HM2. It made the HM3 just simple, reliable, plug and play on any contemporary pedal board. For practical players, that was a huge win.
Okay, let's talk about the actual sound structure, the clipping behavior. How did that differ from the HM2's chaos?
The whole design emphasis seems to have been on control, refinement. The clipping was engineered to be more controlled and compressed.
Okay.
Where the HM2's clipping felt chaotic, like a sledgehammer, just generating all sorts of unintended extra harmonic noise, the HM3 offered a smoother top end and less chaotic clipping behavior. It delivered the gain, but with discipline.
So it sounded.
Tighter, more modern, higher fidelity, maybe, which was pretty much exactly what a lot of the mid-90s metal scene was looking for in production. ###C, tonal profile and legacy.
So the resulting tone, you're saying it was tight, very scooped distortion, strong low end but controlled highs. It delivered gain, but with precision. And crucially, without that signature HM2 aggressive buzzsaw thing.
Which made it really suitable for the musical trends that were emerging then. Modern metal rhythm tones, the heavier side of alternative rock, maybe even some grunge bands who needed clarity alongside the distortion.
Right.
It was probably the ideal choice for players who wanted high gain, wanted definition, but didn't want that raw, abrasive, sometimes kind of muddy edge that the HM2 always had.
So if we compare them directly,
Yeah.
the HM3 definitely had advantages. Easier to EQ, easier to fit into a busy mix. It had that smoother, less kind of raspy top end. And, reliable BAW-SS, build quality, modern power.
All true.
Yeah.
But the major consideration, the big trade-off, is that it undeniably lost the raw aggression of the HM2. And as a result, it just offered a more generic tone. The price of polishing it up was uniqueness. If you just needed a high-gain sound and didn't care about character, the HM3 was pretty good.
But you couldn't get that sound.
You couldn't get that mythical buzzsaw grind that had accidentally made the HM2 famous. No way.
And that leads right into where it sits historically, doesn't it? The HM3 just never achieved that lasting cult status like its predecessor.
Never. It's really seen now as just a transitional piece in the whole BAW-SS distortion family tree. It sort of efficiently cleared the path for the MT2 metal zone to become the real mainstream high-gain flagship.
While also failing to capture any of that immortal chaos that made the HM2 special.
Exactly. It was technically superior in many ways, maybe sensible, but ultimately culturally insignificant compared to the HM2. Okay, but the story of the HM series, it doesn't just stop at the HM3 kind of fading out, because decades after the original HM2 was discontinued, its rarity, its cult status, it just grew exponentially.
Right, especially as that Swedish death metal sound kept having revivals. New generations of extreme metal bands kept discovering it.
Totally. And the demand for that specific chainsaw sound, it never went away, which led to just ridiculous prices for original HM2s on the used market, and a whole cottage industry of software plugins trying to emulate it.
The demand got so loud, so persistent, that BAW-SS eventually just couldn't ignore it anymore. Which brings us finally to 2021 and the announcement of the HM2W heavy metal Wazacraft.
Yep. This was Baez directly saying, okay, we hear you, responding to the massive, sustained cultural impact of a pedal they'd stopped making 30 years earlier. The fan reaction, the pre-orders, it was absolutely huge.
And that Wazacraft name is really important here, isn't it? It's not just a reissue.
Critically important, yeah. It's basically Baez's top-tier stamp. Premium quality, heritage recreation. It signifies a premium analog distortion. And it guarantees that this is an all-analog, discrete Wazacraft recreation of the original circuit.
The component-level accuracy.
That's the promise. This isn't just like a digital model in a box. It's a dedicated, obsessive commitment to faithfully rebuilding that original analog core that created the legendary tone. They weren't just cloning it. They were aiming to perfect the clone using modern premium components.
And in doing this resurrection, they finally tackled all those annoying historical issues, those technical limitations we talked about with the original 83 unit.
Absolutely. Huge quality of life improvements. The HM2W uses the modern PSA adapter power standard. No more ACA confusion. And it features a premium buffered bypass the Waza grade buffer.
What does that mean practically?
It completely eliminates the noise floor problems and the power headaches tied to the vintage ACA requirement. You get the original circuit's tone, but with modern reliability and quiet operation. Your signal stays cleaner when the pedal is off, and it runs perfectly on any standard modern power supply. It just works.
Hashtag tag take B dual mode functionality. But the HM2W also gives players versatility that the original just never had, mostly through its controls, right? It's got the original level, distortion, and those all-important color mix LH knobs. Gotta have those. But the revolutionary addition is that little mode switch on top, offering standard and custom modes.
Yeah, this dual mode thing is brilliant. It's the perfect bridge between like pure nostalgia and modern practical application. The standard mode, that's the time machine, the history book in a box.
Okay.
It's meticulously voiced, Biasa says, to be identical to the original 1983 HM2 circuit. It gives you that classic grinding tone, the massive low end, the scooped mids, the screaming highs. It guarantees that authentic Swedish death metal tone is there exactly as it was, warts and all.
Okay, so standard is pure vintage recreation. Then you flip the switch to custom mode. This is where BLS put their modern spin on it, using that same analog foundation.
Exactly. While keeping the basic aggressive HM2 voice, the custom mode introduces some really key benefits designed for players today. Okay, first, you get higher output overall, more volume on tap, and expanded headroom, which means it distorts a bit more smoothly at higher gain settings, maybe less compressed sounding.
Okay.
And critically, it features a much tighter low end and a slightly refined mid-range structure compared to the original's massive scoop.
Hold on. Why is a tighter low end important for modern metal? If the standard mode is supposed to be perfect, why mess with the bass frequencies?
Good question. It's because so much modern extreme metal relies on super low tunings, drop-tuned guitars way down to C or B or even lower sometimes on 7 or 8-string guitars.
Right.
The original HM2's low end, while huge and awesome, could get really muddy or indistinct, especially with fast playing in those super low tunings. Modern production often demands more clarity down there.
So custom mode cleans that up.
Custom mode essentially tightens up that massive low-frequency boost. It gives the overall tone more definition, less sort of flub or bloom in the bass. It allows those complex, really low palm-muted riffs to cut through with precision. But crucially, without losing that underlying HM2 aggression and character, it caters directly to the technical demands of 21st century metal production. Hashtag C. Tonal profile, use cases, and legacy cemented. So what you end up with is this incredible tonal versatility in one box. You've got the authentic, raw, analog Swedish death metal tone right there in standard mode.
The classic chainsaw.
Yep. And then you flip to custom mode and you get a more contemporary, more powerful, slightly clearer, but still aggressive tone. It becomes this really versatile tool, just as valuable for players chasing pure authenticity as it is for those trying to create completely new sounds built on that foundation.
And the use cases reflect that flexibility now.
Totally. Of course, you still have the authentic Swedish death metal sound.
Right.
You see new generations of extreme bands embracing the HM2W for exactly that, but it's also getting used really widely, again, for just crushing bass distortion, where that extreme EQ is actually a huge plus, and people are using it to create really complex layered textures and things like industrial music or doom metal, leveraging that really deep, persistent, low-end saturation that the pedal is famous for.
So the HM2W, it really feels like it embodies both tribute and evolution. like our notes say.
Perfectly put, yeah. It faithfully brings back that original circuit, the one that was almost lost to time and scarcity. But it adds those necessary modern upgrades, higher output, better fidelity, the tonal flexibility of the custom mode.
It bridges the gap.
It totally bridges the gap between that raw, early, extreme metal sound and the kind of technical precision that modern players often need. It's cemented the HM2 legacy for decades to come, all in glorious analog.
It's crucial to remember, though, isn't it? Even with the Waza upgrades, the fancy buffer, the custom mode, you're still buying a very specific tool, a scalpel designed for one really intense job.
Oh, absolutely. The HM2W is still heavily colored. That extreme EQ, the thing that makes it famous, it still means this is absolutely not a general-purpose distortion pedal.
Right. You wouldn't use it for blues.
Probably not. If you misuse that EQ, if you don't know what you're doing, it can still totally overpower a mix or weirdly disappear in it. You buy this pedal for the sound of the chainsaw, and you better be ready to wield it properly.
Yeah.
Okay, let's just quickly pull this whole historical journey together for you. Summarize these 3 crucial versions of the HM series and what each one really represented.
All right, lay it out. Start with the OG, the originator, the unintentional masterpiece.
Okay, the HM2 heavy metal from 1983, raw, revolutionary, defined by that super aggressive, totally unique dual band color mix EQ and that chaotic symmetrical clipping result, the iconic chainsaw grind.
A failure by its original design brief.
But a massive revolutionary success because it accidentally defined a whole new genre.
Okay. Then came the attempt to clean it up, make it more mainstream, more refined.
That's the HM3 Hypermetal from 1993. Cleaner, tighter. It had a modernized, simplified high-gain sound, focused on that mid-scooped clarity and, importantly, modern power requirement.
It was competent.
Competent, useful pedal for the 90s metal styles. But its attempt to be disciplined, it stripped away all the memorable chaos, which basically relegated it to being a transitional footnote, quickly overshadowed by the more versatile, if complex, MT2 Metal Zone.
Right. And finally, the modern fusion, the best of both worlds, maybe.
That's the HM2W Waza Craft from 2021, the perfected resurrection. Refined for today through its dual standard and custom modes. It offers every last drop of that classic analog fury in standard mode.
But adds modern reliability.
Modern reliability, improved fidelity, and really essential precision features like the expanded headroom and tighter low-end response in custom mode. It ensures the legacy continues in its truest and its most flexible analog form. Hashtag tag outro etchin.
So we took a really deep dive there into the HM series. We tracked the journey of this pedal that was, let's be honest, almost a failure based on its original design goals.
Pretty much.
Only to become this absolute historical icon that fundamentally reshaped the sound of an entire genre. The HM2 story is just one of the most compelling examples out there of how necessity, constraint, maybe even mistakes can drive artistic revolution.
It really forces you to ask a pretty profound question, I think, about the whole creative process. How often does a product's initial limitation, maybe a narrow design constraint, like that ridiculously aggressive, unforgiving EQ on the HM2, how often does that lead to its ultimate revolutionary success?
Because it forces artists to use it differently.
Exactly. It forces them to use it in an extreme way, an unintended way, a maximalist way.
You mean it like if that EQ hadn't been so crazy extreme, if it hadn't basically demanded you crank everything to 10 just to make it sound like something? Would Entombed have ever found that sound? Would it have just been another mild distortion pedal that ended up in the bargain bin?
Precisely. You could argue the HM2 succeeded because it was so difficult to use subtly. The constraint forced an extreme solution. It really makes you think about the creative power that can come from technical limitations. What unexpected tools are just sitting there waiting to be maxed out in your own field? You know, whether you're a musician or an engineer, a designer, whatever. What's waiting for someone to just intentionally break the intended rules of usage, push it way too far, and maybe discover a revolutionary new sound or approach?
Go find your own unexpected chainsaw.
Go find your own unexpected chainsaw. Yeah.
That is a phenomenal thought to leave our listeners with. Thanks for diving deep with us on this one. We'll catch you next time on The Deep Dive.